I'm Philip Lasser. I'm a composer and professor at Juilliard. I have been teaching at Juilliard since 1996. I also run a summer program in Paris for young composers. And of course, as a composer, I have written in various medium, chamber music, orchestra, piano. I studied early in my life with Nadia Boulanger and her disciples in France. I've finished recently a piano concerto for Simone Dinnerstein, the pianist. Well, first of all, we didn't have really very many definitive commitments on the part of orchestras. She was fairly confident that something would come, but as we had decided when I was finished with the orchestration, we soon rapidly saw the value of having as realistic a demo of the piece as possible to show to arts administrators, the orchestra managers, the artistic directors of the orchestras, not necessarily the conductors, because they're the ones, the artistic directors are often the ones who make the bookings and decisions. So we felt pretty soon after finishing the orchestration that the next step was to get a good audio recording of the piece so that we could then send it to orchestras and have them review it for possible inclusion in their upcoming seasons. Well, I remember when we finally, Simone and I had finally decided to go ahead and do this, I was put in contact with you to engage in beginning. I was extremely apprehensive. I knew you as a colleague and as someone who has, with whom I've worked in the past, but not with regard to recording a work of mine. And I was apprehensive. I didn't know how natural this would be, how it would be, how easy the intersection from, let's say, a finale score, finale file to an orchestration. It seemed to me an unfathomable amount of work, and I didn't know that it would ever sound natural. So I was very apprehensive when I started. But first of all, I remember you got the score, and the request for getting the hard copy of the score was a very important issue for me, because I felt that right away it meant that you're interested in the music as it is notated, not as it is computer generated, so to speak, because of course it's copied into the computer, but it's been written with blood, sweat, and tears on a piece of paper. And I felt very much that that was an important thing. Furthermore, I remember after you got it, we went through the score by phone systematically with tempos. You're asking me precisely how to speed up to this tempo that you have, let's say in measure 60 or whatever, and how do you want to slow down, and you were very methodical about it. And so all of a sudden I got the sense that, well, okay, he's really discussing the flow, which is to me the hardest thing to get first. And then I remember you telling me that it would take you a week or so to generate all the parts, and that we were then going to fine-tune it, begin the fine-tuning process, but that getting the instruments connected and so on would take you about a week, and so on, that you were going to send me a demonstration of that. And I, again, didn't know quite what to expect, and when I did get it, it felt like a relief to me, because I actually started to hear my piece not as I had dreamed, but in fact as I had imagined, which is different. You know, dreaming is highfalutin. Imagining is how you work as a composer. You want it to sound as how you imagined. How you dream is another story. So I got it back, and I started to say, yes, that's starting to be how I hear this piece and how I've always heard this piece in my head. I think the next thing to point out is that your process afterwards was, first of all, amazingly giving of time. I will have to say that I was so impressed with how much effort, time you took on the phone, on email, with me in the studio when we worked, to never making me feel stressed about a request or about a demand, about this is too loud, this is too slow. We fussed over several difficult tempo changes until it sounded natural, until it sounded right, and you were just ready to do it and never made me feel as though my request was too much, or let's, you know, you don't want to do it again, you don't want to spend the time. And that to me is very important, because a work of art is a work of art and it takes a lot of effort to do. And I feel that in many ways what you did is an electronic work of art. And it's hard to do that, to make something sound natural, comfortable, elegant. In an electronic medium, and I think through your sensitive care for the flow of the piece, the elegance of the lines, the balance of the instruments, it ended up sounding much more natural than anyone could possibly imagine. I feel that getting the Ravel Virtual Studio demo permitted us, first of all, to get orchestras interested in the piece, because they could hear a realistic rendition of the work. The artistic directors, the conductors, those that make the decisions. But then on a second level, after we got the commitment on the part of several orchestras, and in fact we've gotten quite a few, it became much more of a tool for us. And we feel that it is an efficient tool for the conductor and for the orchestra in general to hear the work as far as the flow, as far as the tempos and speeds and metric shifts from one tempo to another. The conductor doesn't have to go from 0 to 60, so to speak, from a score. The reality is, of course, most conductors are busy, cannot spend the hours and hours and hours that it would take to do from a score at the piano. The recording that we have from the Ravel Virtual Studios is going to allow a conductor to really hear the general, natural flow of the piece as I had anticipated it. I think more than I expected. It also allowed me to start figuring out balancing. So in other words, the balances of the forces, the strings versus the woodwinds, when a soloist comes in, how that soloist is going to come in, the relative dynamics of the brass to the woodwinds, is something which I hadn't really thought you could do, but as it turns out you can, and with quite great agility. And so it becomes more of a natural demonstration of what the piece can be and will be, and it probably, of course, with the infusion of the natural human component, will be very much what we hear on the recording. Having this recording at our disposal has allowed us to explore multiple orchestras. We've gained phenomenal interest in the piece through having sent the score, the orchestra, the score and the recording to the orchestra. We've also generated enormous interest in the world of the publicity, because now people can get glimpses of what this work is. We have extracts of the movements, so that when we're trying to promote it for a possible interview on the radio, we take a snapshot of parts of movements that we think are the highlights of the music, and so on. And it has been incredibly useful to have as a tool prior to the premiere, because of course without it we would be in silence. And with it we can at least, of course, understanding that it is an electronic format, nonetheless get people excited about this piece prior to the performance. That's a very useful thing. As we go forward, we need more and more contemporary music, good contemporary music, hopefully, to be played by orchestras around the world. And limited time, limited budgets, enormous amount of information, meaning many students, many composers, all writing these works, creates a situation where it's almost impossible to ferret out works that my orchestra would be interested in, let's say if I'm a conductor, or I as a conductor am particularly interested in. I think that what Ravel Virtual Studios allows is an ability to quickly hear a work in an electronic form that nonetheless gives the impression, a true impression, not a false impression of the work, which would then enhance the possibility of conductors making choices of which pieces they want and which pieces speak to them for performance, and also as a tool for them to then bring this work to the orchestra for interpretive reasons. Because again, the reality is we're all very busy. The amount of time that it would take to discover a work with an orchestra is simply something that is now to be dreamed about, but is not a practical reality. And what an electronic recording of an orchestra piece allows is that it allows the conductor already to have a good impression of how the piece goes. And even more importantly, since compositional languages are very varied and we have composers of all different styles and different types, it allows the composer, because of the way you work with the composer, to give the closest impression that he or she may have about his or her own work, so that the conductor already has a good guideline of the style, the sonority, the whole feeling of the work. And I think that far from replacing an orchestra, helps to bolster the orchestra, to foster the orchestras, both to be committed to contemporary music, to perform contemporary music, and to hopefully perform it better than they would have if they didn't have enough time to rehearse a work. Here, again, as I keep saying, they don't have hours and hours and hours of rehearsal time. They never do. Their budgets are extremely limited, so all of a sudden they have to put together an orchestra piece in 2 to 3 hours of rehearsal. Well, at least the conductor and hopefully the orchestra itself might have heard this piece and kind of knows how it goes. That's an enormous benefit, enormous benefit. I feel that for students, being able to hear an orchestral work of theirs in as natural as possible electronic format is incredibly useful as a learning tool for orchestration, for composition itself, because then they can actually hear the work in its entirety in a way that is, as I said, not a cheating way. It's a true, natural presentation of the voices of the lines that you use, and therefore it's a good assessment tool for a composer to adjust orchestrations, instrumentations, dynamics, tempi. Even I remember I changed a detail in a harp, which, because of hearing and trusting the fact that far from being falsified by fake miking and so on, the naturalness of the orchestra, the way you had set it up, allowed me to realize that with an extra little doubling that I had added in the harp, all of a sudden you could hear the harp much more clearly than we could before, with no change in dynamics, no change in volume control that you did, would indicate that actually it's a pretty good gauge for many orchestrational issues. I'm a firm believer that orchestrations should be done before, and that you do that based on your craft, your technique, your knowledge. But once it's done, I think that having a virtual recording of your work is an incredibly useful tool for a young musician learning how to compose, how to orchestrate. I would say that this is potentially an invaluable tool for high school composition students and undergraduate composition students in universities that may not have a venue to do recordings of large orchestra pieces, so that they can actually hear their work, discuss it, and again have a realistic version and rendition of their piece, not an unrealistic one. When you hit MIDI on Finale or Sibelius, those are unrealistic sound worlds that those things are creating. Those have nothing to do with reality in a sense that they're unmusically controlled. They're just simply dynamic. They're not dynamic according to how it would really work in an orchestra. And I feel that what you have created with the Ravel Virtual Studio is a true virtual orchestra, where there is trust that it is accurate to the true experience in an orchestra, much more realistically than when one clicks let me hear on MIDI or Finale or Sibelius. And in that sense, I think for young kids, for whether they be in high school or undergraduate programs or even graduate programs, it would be an invaluable tool for them to be able to hear their works. It's a valuable tool for anyone who writes music. There are adults who have joined the musical forces late and would like to hear a work that they might have composed in orchestral form and have no access again to an orchestra. And this will give them a realistic, good, and reliable version of their work. There are very young students who have no access again to an orchestra or to instruments, and who can hope to hear their work, as I said, as a learning experience for them to better their craft and to hear what works, what didn't work, and so on in their orchestrations. I think these things are invaluable tools.